On May 20th, 2025, after spending more than 13 years on death row, Matthew Lee Johnson was put to death by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. His case was unsettling, rooted in a long history of addiction and personal struggles. We'll walk through what happened that day, his final meal, and the last words he ever spoke. To understand Matthew Lee Johnson's crime, we have to look at where he came from. Because this wasn't just another career criminal, not even close. Johnson had worked to rebuild his life and find some stability. He had a family, kids, a quiet life. That made what happened next even harder to understand. On the morning of May 20th, 2012, Johnson walked into the Valero gas station on Broadway Boulevard in Garland, Texas, with a bottle of lighter fluid in his hand. Nancy Harris was just starting her shift behind the counter. She was 76 years old and had worked at the store for years. A beloved member of the community and a longtime churchgoer, she was known for her warmth and kindness, someone who treated every customer with patience and care. She had no idea what was about to happen. Johnson moved behind the register where Harris stood, and without hesitation, he poured lighter fluid over her head. He demanded money. Harris, sensing the danger, did what she could. She opened the register. Johnson grabbed the cash, took her ring, and stuffed 2 cigarette lighters and 2 packs of cigarettes into his pocket. But he wasn't finished. In one last, terrifying act, he did something he could never undo. Johnson struck the lighter and set her on fire. Nancy Harris was suddenly covered in flames. Smoke started filling the small store and she began screaming, crying out for someone to help her. She tried to stop the flames, but they kept spreading. The heat was overwhelming, and she couldn't stop the fire from spreading. A normal morning had turned into a nightmare, and nothing about it made sense. Nancy Harris then rushed to a nearby sink, trying as hard as she could to put out the fire that was burning her body. She splashed water on herself again and again, hoping it would help. She was in terrible pain, screaming for help, doing everything she could to survive. Meanwhile, Matthew Johnson didn't stop to check on her. He didn't show any sign of guilt or fear. He walked out of the store quickly, but calmly, holding some stolen candy in his hand. It was as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just set someone on fire. He didn't look back. He didn't care. Harris's attempts to put out the flames failed. She ran outside, still on fire, screaming for help. Immediately, a witness nearby heard her cries and rushed over with a fire extinguisher. Finally, he managed to put out the remaining flames. Police and paramedics arrived minutes later. Harris had suffered severe burns and was immediately taken to the burn unit at Parkland Memorial Hospital. At the hospital, she described her attacker: heavyset, black, short dark hair, round face. Not long after, witnesses reported seeing a man matching that exact description trying to break into nearby homes. Within the hour, Johnson was caught after a short foot chase. Officers found him hiding in a nearby yard, sweating and out of breath. He did not resist arrest. When the officers searched him, they found the stolen money, the cigarettes, and Harris's ring still in his possession. Then came the worst news. On May 25th, 2012, just 5 days after the incident, Nancy Harris passed away from her injuries. She had suffered burns to over 40% of her body. Despite multiple surgeries and intensive treatment at Parkland Memorial Hospital's burn unit, doctors could not save her. Her funeral was attended by over 100 community members, many from her church. After that, Johnson's charges were upgraded to capital homicide. Eventually, on October 28, 2013, Matthew Lee Johnson stood trial in Dallas County, Texas, charged for taking the life of 76-year-old store worker Nancy Harris. During the trial, the prosecution presented their case with cold precision. They argued that Johnson had deliberately set Harris on fire, a fact captured clearly on store CCTV, all rooted in his intent to steal. The evidence was damning. When police caught Johnson, he had Harris's ring and stolen cash in his possession. But Johnson took the stand and painted a different picture. He claimed he was under the influence of substances at the time. He also insisted he never meant to set Harris on fire, and that he only wanted to scare her. He even showed remorse, begging for understanding. His defense pushed deeper, revealing a history of addiction and early life trauma he had carried since childhood. Friends and family spoke of his troubled past and his efforts to get clean. But the jury wasn't convinced. On October 30th, 2013, they found Johnson guilty of capital murder, moving straight into the sentencing phase. The prosecution demanded the death capital punishment, calling Johnson a menace to society with a long criminal record, insisting he deserved this. The defense fought back hard, presenting more evidence of his painful childhood and addiction. Experts testified Johnson posed a low risk of future violence, especially in prison. Throughout the sentencing, Johnson broke down, begging for mercy, and saying he wanted to live long enough to see his children grow up. Matthew Lee Johnson's future was now uncertain, hanging on what would happen next. This crime was so shocking and so cruel, many struggled to understand it. How could someone do this? Walk into a neighborhood store, steal from an elderly woman, and set her on fire? It didn't make sense. It felt like something out of a nightmare. And for everyone who knew Nancy Harris, the question kept echoing. Why would anyone do this to her? To understand that, we have to go back. Matthew Lee Johnson was born on September 17, 1975, in Dallas County, Texas. His upbringing was rough. From an early age, there were signs: anger, instability, trouble with the law. At just 15, he was arrested for car theft. In 1994, he violently resisted arrest and bit a police officer. Over the years, the charges kept coming: assault, theft, more aggressive behavior. In 2011, he was caught stealing from a former employer. But at some point, something changed. Johnson seemed to get his life on track. He got married, had children, built a family. By the time of his trial in October 2013, he was still being described by some as a devoted father. But underneath that calm, there was something darker, something hidden that was ready to come out again. And on May 20th, 2012, it did. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with their unanimous decision. On November 8, 2013, Matthew Lee Johnson was sentenced to death. After all, 12 jurors agreed the only fitting punishment was capital punishment. Johnson showed no emotion, no tears, no anger, no fear. It was as if he had already accepted his fate. His attorney later revealed that Johnson had expected the death sentence all along. But the victim's family had a very different story. Nancy Harris's children and grandchildren voiced their pain and outrage loud and clear. One of her sons vowed to be present at Johnson's execution. Another said he would never forgive Johnson, hoping his mother's screams would haunt him until his very last breath. Her granddaughters were equally fierce. They insisted Johnson wasn't sorry for what he did and deserved every consequence. They said they would never forgive him. Johnson wasn't ready to go quietly. His appeals began almost immediately. On November 18, 2015, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals rejected his first attempt. The U.S. Supreme Court followed suit on June 27, 2016, and the pattern continued. Every appeal Johnson filed on September 2019, January 13, 2022, August 11, 2023, and February 20, 2024, was denied. The courts upheld the decision, finding that Johnson had made a deliberate choice to take a life, and he was not deserving of freedom. Finally, in January 2025, after all appeals were exhausted, a Dallas County judge signed the death warrant. Matthew Lee Johnson was scheduled to be executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas, on May 20th, at the age of 49. Under Texas law, death row inmates no longer get to request a final meal. So on his last day, Matthew Johnson was served the same standard tray as everyone else. Just before the injection were administered, Johnson turned to the family of Mrs. Harris, some of whom were seated just feet away, and spoke directly to them. "As I look at each and every one of you, I see her on that day," he said. Please ask for y'all's forgiveness. I never meant to hurt her. I pray she's the first person I see when I open my eyes, and I'll spend eternity with her." He looked toward the other men still waiting on death row, called them his brothers, told them he loved them. He thanked the prison staff, not for leniency, but for treating him with fairness, for treating him like a man, for giving him the time to try to make things right with God. Then came the words for his wife, his daughters. I'm sorry for giving up. Just know, it wasn't anything y'all did. I made the wrong choices, and now I pay the price. He spoke once more of faith. I thank the Lord for the last 13 years. He gave me the chance to ask for forgiveness. I thank him for his redemption. Welcome me, Father. Thank you all for being here. I'm done, Warden. There was no visible reaction from the Harris family. 3 sons, 2 daughters-in-law, a granddaughter. They quietly witnessed the execution, then left without speaking to reporters. As the lethal dose flowed through his system, Johnson gasped. Once, twice, then fell still. His breathing slowed. A sound like snoring escaped from his chest, and within a minute, all movement stopped. At 6:53 p.m., he took his final breath. It had been 26 minutes since the process began.